Hello and welcome to our webinar, Don't Become a Target, Think Outside the EDR Box, brought to you by Kaspersky. I'm your host, Katie Bavoso from the Channel Company. Cyberattacks skyrocketed in 2020 as bad actors took advantage of unprepared businesses impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, a majority of IT security experts say they do not believe their organizations are protected from future attacks. Traditional endpoint detection and response solutions are not built for today's cybersecurity needs, and businesses implementing them still run the risk of falling prey to attacks. For more on this, I'm joined by Kaspersky North America's Ori Amar, Vice President of Pre-Sales and Systems Engineering, and Randall Richard, Head of Enterprise Sales. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you both so much for being here. Let's get started with segment one, a wider attack surface. Question one is for you, Ori. How has the threat landscape changed during the course of the pandemic, and what factors have contributed to this?
So thank you very much, Katie. First and foremost, hi, and thanks for having us. We see on the news every day that targeted attacks are the theme of the day, right? Every day, more and more news of targeted cyber attacks. And we see these impact every business across every market vertical, every size. We see from large critical infrastructure providers to meat producing to school districts and healthcare. So no one is really immune or off their radar for those adversaries who now conduct targeted attacks at scale. Obviously, these are financially motivated cyber threat actors, and there's, of course, financial gain for them when launching these attacks. So we're no longer seeing the spray and pray, widely cast net, seeing if something catches on, and then they may extract some revenue out of it. And nowadays, it's all targeted. They carefully research their target company or business or organization and conduct the attack based off of that research. Now, the contributing factors are obviously the pandemic and the rapid shift to work from home or work from anywhere. Businesses almost overnight had to come up with ways to keep operating. And not always security was top of mind during that transition. First and foremost, the business had to keep running. Security was maybe an afterthought, or let's just see what happens. And we all see the consequences. There's a lot of financially motivated threat actors who not only conduct the attacks themselves, but also lend their expertise and their infrastructure in the form of attack as a service. So one who wants to enter this market and launch a targeted attack no longer needs to have the skills and the expertise. One can simply procure such infrastructure and capabilities from malicious threat actors who provide their services almost on demand.
Wow. So, Ori, let me have you expand on that a little bit more in question two. What kinds of threats are most prevalent right now, and what size businesses are being targeted the most?
Right. Thank you, Katie. So we see the age-old problem of ransomware reemerge in force these days. But we do see a shift where historically these ransomware impacted an organizational availability, meaning they encrypted machines, preventing work from being done. This was historically the go-to variant of ransomware. You had to pay the ransom in order to receive the decryption key, recover access to your data or your machines. But organizations have wisened up, invested in backups, which is a very effective way to mitigate the risk of lockers and the ransomware type that encrypts data. So we see the shift towards ransomware being the type that exfiltrates data. So once they breach the target company or organizations, adversaries will start taking out data over time, confidential data, PII, and other sorts of data that may be valuable, and they hold the data hostage. They threaten to leak it unless the ransom is paid. Now, with this type of ransom, it is much harder to deal with because once confidential information has been leaked out, you never know how many copies, how many times it has been shared. So there's less that could be done to mitigate the impact of a ransomware attack that impacts your confidentiality versus the ones that impact availability. And for SMBs, this may be a non-survivable catastrophic event. The bigger, the very large enterprises, critical infrastructure, or even very large school districts that have experienced ransomware attacks, city, local, state, and education, this may be survivable because they are providing a service. They are more of a service provider versus a business. Smaller businesses, such event may be catastrophic.
Very much so. And we're actually going to turn to you now, Randy, and bring you into the conversation and talk a little bit more about the risk to businesses if these threats are successful. Ori just talked about that they could be catastrophic. But aside from losing your entire business, what are those other risks? Is it monetary? Is it basically reputation? Tell me about that.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, it is really complex when you look at what the impact and implication could be from, a successfully executed ransomware attack on a smaller organization. And as Ori had mentioned, the threat actors are getting smarter. They're actually trying to target, they're customizing, what they're charging for a ransom, selecting their targets based on a perceived ability to pay the ransom. They're not necessarily looking to knock people out of business. They're looking for financial gain. So their best strategy is to find people who can actually pay this ransom. But they don't always get it right, unfortunately. And when you look at the loss of productivity, if there's a shutdown involved in this ransom, reputational damage, the cost of incident response, and just making sure that once the incident is passed, that they are safe and their overall network is clean. And then the payment of the ransom, the problem is a lot of these things really add up and can be extremely disruptive for a smaller organization, especially if they're not properly prepared. And the challenge is, since the threat landscape has changed and these targeted attacks are more often focused on smaller organizations, the organizations themselves often don't think that they're a target. So the proper preparation may not be in place today.
You actually kind of alluded to my next question, which is, are businesses in the SMB market in particular equipped to handle this current threat landscape on their own? Why or why not? Clearly, Randy, from what you've just alluded to, they are not prepared. What are they lacking in this space?
Well, there's two things that you really need to do in order to address the threat of targeted attacks. One, you have to have the right tools in place. Two, you have to have people with proper training, the right skill set, with their hands on those tools so that they can actually make sense of the data that these tools are uncovering. And there's two approaches to do this. There's the in-house approach, and we see some organizations doing that where they're purchasing the tools, setting them up, within a SOC, and then, looking to hire, in-house talent, hire or train in-house talent. But the challenge with that is it can be extremely expensive, because even if you can afford, all the tools that you may need, finding the people with the right skills is, often the most expensive part of this strategy, and also the most difficult, because there's a real shortage of trained talent when it comes to threat analysis and threat hunting. So even if your budget's limitless, finding the qualified people can be extremely difficult. The other approach is leveraging a service, either an outsourced SOC, managed detection and response, or managed threat hunting, such as Kaspersky's Optimum Security.
And we're going to jump into that shortly, Randy. And that brings us into segment 2. Traditional solutions are no longer enough. Ori, let's go back to you with this first question. Based on the answers to the previous questions, are legacy solutions enough to protect businesses in this new world of work? Why or why not?
So this is a complicated question, so let's elaborate. The legacy solutions are still needed. They very much have proven their value over time. They're very effective in what is known as prevention. They know how to deal with what is known bad. So we know these indicators of compromise, these files, these websites are bad, so we'll block access, we'll prevent something ever happening if you click on that file, go to that website, and so on. But as we have discussed earlier, we know the risk of targeted attacks is more common than one would like to think. In the world of targeted attacks, prevention is no longer enough. An adversary will get in and will get to their objectives unless detected. So we need to shift the mindset and solutions and the people operating the tools, as Randy alluded to, from preventing a threat to detection, being able to detect malicious activity, being able to detect the adversary on your network. And the objective here is timely detection of adversarial activity, not prevention, but timely detection.
So you say that these traditional solutions are still very important, but where do they fall short, these traditional endpoint solutions? Where do they fall short of the needs and expectations that these businesses need?
Right, that's an excellent question, Katie. So traditionally, endpoint solution focused again on prevention. They were called endpoint protection or endpoint prevention platforms. They were very effective, as we mentioned, dealing with the known bad. They later on evolved to deal with some gray area, but that gray area focused on the here and now, the immediate term, what's happening. So while we are not sure this file is bad, let's look at its behavior. And then if we know this behavior to resemble malicious operation, we'll then block it. But targeted attacks are so much more. There's a lot more happening. There's a lot of telltale signs happening over time. We know dwell time of an adversary on a target network could be measured not in minutes or hours, but sometimes days, weeks, or months. So legacy endpoint solutions dealing with the here and now are not as effective in detecting that those telltale signs and being able to provide the proper context and understand that all the things that are happening, seemingly unrelated, are part of a targeted attack or a campaign by a skilled adversary. This is why endpoint detection or response is the answer to that. That is a natural evolution and progression of endpoint security solutions from being focused on threat prevention to threat detection.
And Ori, you said it yourself. It sounds like we can't just focus on the here and now, like you were saying. There needs to be predictive measures in place to focus on what's coming down the road, what's around the corner. So question 3 is also for you. What solutions must businesses invest in right now to ensure their data and networks are safe?
So that is a difficult question, and each organization need to perform their own risk assessment, their own threat modeling, understand what is most impactful to them. There is a variety of solutions and there's different strategies. When you properly analyze the risk, you can, of course, mitigate the risk. You can transfer the risk. You can accept the risk. So depending on your tolerance, you may decide to invest, for example, in risk reduction. If we talk about targeted attacks, EDR is a very common investment for organizations. By deploying endpoint detection and response tools, you're able to reduce the risk associated with targeted attacks by being able to detect them in a timely manner. If your additional concern is ransomware of the encryption type, we know organizations have invested in backups, mitigating the risk. So even if I do not detect the risk or do anything with the risk of a targeted attack, I invested in backup. So if I'm hit with an encryptor type ransomware, I know what my recovery time would be. I know what my ROI on that investment. But there's also obviously the personnel element to this. If you deploy tools, people need to be trained and constantly kept up to date on operating these tools, especially around threat detection or the art of threat hunting. And obviously, as a general consensus, there is the average employee that needs to be enabled to recognize the signs of targeted attack, most likely commencing with phishing or very targeted spear phishing type attacks. So let's not just look at silver bullets in the form of technology and products, but on the human side of this equation as well.
Randy, let's bring you back in for this next question. How should MSPs and solution providers be having this conversation with their clients? I imagine that you shouldn't probably come out guns blazing, telling them everything that they can lose. So how do you have this conversation comfortably and assuring them that they have the tools in place?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, that is the challenge. You know, in the channel, we often talk about that status that we're all seeking, you know, that trusted advisor. And this is a real time for MSPs and solution providers to step up and earn that position with their customers, you know, by helping them to understand that the threat landscape has changed. And we don't have to use scare tactics to help them understand this. You know, it's in the headlines. And if you kind of go beyond the headlines and look at, you know, some of the reporting on what's going on in the threat landscape right now, you know, there's plenty of evidence to show, you know, that smaller organizations are being targeted in a different way. So that's really the conversation to have. You know, not so much scare tactics, but, you know, this is how it used to be, and this is how it is now. And because of, you know, the franchising of ransomware, things like ransomware for hire, there's just a lot more players, a lot more criminal organizations that are leveraging these targeted attacks that are customized for a specific organization. And it takes a different set of tools to prepare yourself and protect yourself from those types of attacks. Because they're more persistent in nature, they're crafted specifically to the organization, and they may leverage multiple attack vectors. So things like threat hunting services leverage trained analysts who have the ability to draw correlations by, things that, in the previous threat landscape, maybe just small indicators of something's a little amiss, nothing really to be concerned about. But the importance of having the right tools in place and the right people, they can then draw those dots together, connect the smoke signals, and truly understand that there may be a targeted attack happening in this environment. So helping your customers understand the new reality that we're all living in and make the necessary adjustments in their strategy to address those challenges.
Randy, let's talk about those tools, services, and people all right now, because segment 3 is our last segment, Kaspersky Optimum Security. And let's dive right in with question 1 for you, Randy. What is Kaspersky Optimum Security, first of all, and why is it designed to combat today's threat environment?
Kaspersky's Optimum Security is a managed threat hunting solution that provides 24/7 monitoring by skilled analysts who are trained to identify those patterns that may emerge from those quiet smoke signals happening across an organization's environment. These are little incidents that may seem innocuous on their own, but may actually be evidence of a targeted attack. Kaspersky Optimum Security leverages our most tested, highest performing endpoint protection solution, and it adds that human element so critical in the identification of targeted attacks that are prevalent in today's threat landscape.
Thanks so much, Randy. Ori, we're going to go back to you now. How does Kaspersky Optimum Security augment and improve existing IT security teams?
Thank you, Katie. So as Randy mentioned, Optimum Security is a solution that combines not only our EDR product, but our managed detection and response service with a focus on threat hunting. This allows our analysts to act as an extension of the in-house security analyst or IT and security folks, augmenting and uplifting them by providing not only our expertise, but also our availability, which is 24/7, 365. Because what happens most of the time, especially with SMBs, they make an investment in the product, but may not have full coverage to operate the tools throughout day, night, weekends, holidays, and so on. So not only you are getting the expertise with Optimum Security, but the availability, which is often overlooked.
Randy, what are the partner benefits of Kaspersky Optimum Security, and how can partners maximize their ROI with it? This is the sexiest question of the webinar, if you will. Everybody wants to talk about money. Let's talk about it now.
Kaspersky Optimum Security gives partners a tool in their toolkit that helps them more closely align to the needs of their customers, especially within the SMB and kind of the smaller enterprise market. A lot of the threat hunting solutions out there in the market are built on top of some very expensive tool sets. And in order to benefit from the service, the customer has to fully invest in these expensive tools. Oftentimes, tools that are of no use to their organization on their own. So our approach as far as addressing the issues, of targeted attacks is similar, but we take a less expensive path. And it's been shown to be extremely comparable in results, at times even getting better results than our competition. So this allows our partners to position a solution that's a better fit oftentimes, for that SMB customer, that lower enterprise customer, fits their budgets, gives them the tool set that they actually can use and need, and not more. So it's a way to show your customers that you're looking to help them address their challenges, but do so in a way that helps them maximize their budgets and make sure that they're not overspending in areas where it's really of no use.
Thanks, Randy. And Ori, this is a really important distinction that I feel that we need to bring up. What is the difference between Kaspersky EDR Optimum and Kaspersky Optimum Security?
That's a great question, Katie. So EDR Optimum is the product. It's the piece of software that provides EDR functionality to our customers. But there's a common misconception that the tool does it all by itself and requires no operation, just some simple configuration. But if you recall our conversation, EDR was brought to market to deal with targeted attacks. There are humans on the other end of, let's say, the link who are targeting your organization. Deploying just a tool without analysts constantly looking at the output, at the alerts, at the suspicions may not be sufficient to achieve that holy grail, which is timely detection of adversarial activity. So by adding our valuable MDR with a focus on threat hunting service, we provide it as a bundle, both product and service, again, as mentioned earlier, uplifting the internal resources, which may be insufficient to cover 24/7, 365. So again, with the solution, you get not only the product, but our expertise to back up the in-house teams.
Thank you so much, Ori. And Randy, you're going to take this last question in segment 3. How does Kaspersky Optimum Security integrate with partners and customers' overall strategy?
Well, as we've been saying, when it comes to our managed threat hunting solution, it's all about those targeted attacks. And with those targeted attacks, the most important thing is timely detection. So our Optimum Security solution is built on an endpoint solution that's an industry leader when it comes to detection, and it's designed to give the customer exactly what they need in a cost-effective way.
And that brings us into our next steps for viewers. We're leaving them with some homework. Ori, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways viewers should leave from this webinar with today?
All right. So number 1 is that targeted attacks are not a matter of if, but really a matter of when. And the second one is that investing in a solution that would provide timely detection would lead to a much better response. Timely detection, the more efficient your response would be. Putting out a fire at the initial onset of smoke is less costly and less damaging than trying to put out the fire when the entire house is burning. And third, consider a solution, not just products. As we mentioned, the valuable addition of an external managed threat detection and threat hunting service would prove its worth by augmenting the internal in-house resources.
Randy, what can those watching today do to get involved or learn more about Kaspersky Optimum Security?
Well, for organizations who are interested in Optimum Security, we're closely aligned to our channel partners. So speak to your preferred channel account manager, and they will definitely get engaged and have a conversation with you. For those partners out here who may not be working with us yet, feel free to reach out to us at channel.marketing@kaspersky.com.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. I thank you both so much for being here today and giving us your knowledge and insights. This has been Don't Become a Target, Think Outside the EDR Box with Kaspersky. I'm Katie Bavoso. Thanks for watching.